Hello everybody and welcome back to your favorite regulatory news channel, the CRR III channel of PwC. My name is Martin.neisen. I'm a partner with PwC here in Frankfurt. I'm leading the Global Basel IV initiative and also I'm leading the Risk and Regulation division here in Germany. Today, we want to speak again about the European Banking Package 2021, which was published in the end of October and shaking a little bit the banking industry. And in this news channel, we would like to pick out certain topics and go a little bit more into the detail and try to investigate what does it actually mean for the European credit institution. And today, we are speaking about one topic within the CRR3. We are talking about the calculation of capital requirements for market risk and the CVA risk capital charge. And like always, I'm not doing that alone. I have again a global expert on these two topics. This time it's Guillaume Magdelyns, a director from the Brussels office of PwC. He's the national Basel IV expert in Belgium and also an absolute FRTB expert. Guillaume, welcome. Salut, ça va? Hoe gaat het?
Very good. Thank you, Martin, for welcoming me.
Guillaume, let's start directly and dig a little bit deeper into the topics. And I think we start with a smaller topic with the CVA risk capital charge. And here my first question is, there are two approaches actually by the Basel Committee proposed that will be adopted now by the EU Commission within the CRR3. But the banking industry is referring always to four approaches. That confuses me a little bit. Can you please bring a little bit light into this confusion?
Sure, Martin. This is confusing, but maybe let's first recall what CVA risk is. CVA risk arises in a financial transaction when a counterparty might default, and the exposure at risk is actually led by a market movement. This being said, CVA risk is at the crossroad of market and credit risk. It's a kind of hybrid element and also quite complex. And all the burden of today's approach is in the recognition of potential hedging strategies that financial institutions put in place, which are today mostly not eligible from a capital perspective. So our framework is actually a bit outdated and not fit for purpose. And in this new banking package, supervisors are providing the opportunity to implement various approaches, depending on the complexity of the institution, but also the way they want to recognize those hedging benefits. Yep. So it's not tailor-made, but there is a pragmatism and a proportionality principle in the rule. First approach is the simplified approach. This one is aimed at smaller institutions that are not operating a large trading book and are therefore not exposed to a large and significant CVA risk. Yep. This being said, banks must operate below a threshold of 100 million of derivative, or less than 5% of their total assets. So really the smaller institutions. In terms of impact, operationally, the calculation effort is not so big, as well as the capital impact is relatively acceptable compared to the other approach. Okay. So the rule of proportionality has been well implemented in this case, as we see in the impact studies. Secondly, you have the basic approach. Those ones are compulsory for banks operating above the threshold I just mentioned. And for that, banks have to implement a completely new computation mechanism that is much more intensive, as well as potentially recognizing diversification benefits and mitigation effect. And that's where confusion enters into place, because this basic approach is actually divided into two approaches. Yeah. A reduced version, which is not recognizing the hedging benefits. This is the least interesting for institution because computationally it's much more complex. From a capital perspective, you don't benefit from hedging, so that's the least favorable position. The second part of the basic approach is the fully loaded approach, the full version. In that one, you have additional calculation to perform, but you can benefit from a partial reduction of capital due to hedging benefit. Finally, the fourth approach we were referring to is the standardized approach. This being said, standardized, it's still quite complex in the sense that it's a kind of extension of the FRTB framework. So it's much more risk sensitive based on sensitivities, but CVA sensitivities are quite complex to compute. So this is in itself a burden to implement. And not this being said, it's also subject to supervisory approval. So you cannot just on your own decide to use it.
That's definitely something new. Standardized approach that needs approval. Wow. That's new.
Yeah. But this burden also comes at the benefit of a much better recognition of hedging and diversification benefits, as the risk sensitivities nature of these new methodologies allows it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Guillaume, for this first overview. One thing that is very important and it's discussed a lot in the recent months and even in the last years, and that is with regard to exemptions of the CVA. I mean, officially, for the first time, the CVA risk capital charge was introduced with Basel III, so it was implemented within the CRR on European level, smaller changes in the CRR II. But a lot of discussion was around that certain positions have an exemption from the calculation of the CVA risk capital charge. The Basel Committee was criticizing a lot. Even in one audit, they said that the EU implementation is not compliant, actually, which is a harsh judgment. And also the EBA, the European Banking Authority, says, or at least is not happy with these exemptions. Are there any news regarding these exemptions in the CR3?
You're right, Martin. The topic has been heavily discussed in the preparation of the banking package. And as usual in Europe, the result is a compromise. So in the new banking package, these exemption remains applicable for regulatory capital requirement. So OTC exposure with sovereign, with intragroup counterparties, or with non-financial counterparties are still left aside from the CVA capital charge. Nevertheless, the new banking package introduced a disclosure requirement. So banks will have to compute the actual capital charge for those exposure. This means it will increase transparency on the market and also provide supervisor and EBA deeper scrutiny on that risk and potentially leading in the future in a further evolution of that aspect.
Yeah, so then definitely it is a political compromise, so to say. Okay, thank you very much for this overview regarding the CVA risk capital charge. Already extremely interesting, and I think we could even talk hours on the details of the approaches. Maybe one thing I would like to point out, and I would like to ask another question on that, because I have seen that there's a new factor within the CVA risk capital charge computation, a so-called DS factor. Could you please explain to me what does this factor mean and why is it there suddenly?
Indeed, Martin, following the consultation phase and the impact observed of the capital charge on the CVA risk, the new regulation introduced a DS factor that aims at compensating, so factor down the final capital charge by a 0.25 coefficient.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot. Like, that's a huge benefit for the European banks, I must say. It will be interesting again how the discussion on global level will be regarding the implementation, but we will see what is going on there. So leaving now the topic of the CVA risk capital charge and looking a little bit to the other big topic regarding the capital requirements for market risk, and here we are speaking about the introduction of FRTB, the fundamental review of the trading book. But also here I'm totally confused because I thought FRTB was already introduced in the CR2. Can you explain to me why they say that the FRTB was now introduced again in CRR3?
You're correct, Martin. The CRR2 introduced the FRTB standardized approach requirement for disclosure purpose only. But this being said, the full Basel FRTB framework was not implemented. Only the methodology and the revision of the trading book banking book boundary was left aside. Now, with the 2021 banking package, the full FRTB suite is now put in place, meaning a new standardized approach, a new internal model approach, as well as the revised banking book, trading book boundaries. And this is a critical element of the fundamental review in the trading book, as the boundaries was heavily criticized during the great financial crisis, as some banks were arbitraging between allocating a position in the banking or the trading book, benefiting from a more favorable capital treatment. This will definitely not be possible anymore, as the rules are based on presumption relying on the product characteristic or the trading intent, which is difficult to reallocate, and any potential reallocation will be subject to supervisory approval and scrutiny. So therefore the rules are much clearer and transparency is ensured.
Yeah, and of course we as PwC, we were supporting a lot of clients already with making an impact analysis also with regard to this topic, and we have seen that there can be quite a significant shift from the trading book to the banking book and vice versa, and that of course could also lead to a quite significant impact with regard to the capital requirements. Yeah, absolutely. Speaking about the capital requirements, I think we also have to speak a little bit about the approaches that can be used for the calculation of the capital requirement. In the Basel framework, they are called standardized approach, or SBA, sensitivity-based approach, and the internal model-based approach, IMA. In the CRR, when I read it, they talk about an alternative standardized approach and an alternative internal model-based approach. That again confuses me a little bit, and maybe also some of our viewers. Could you enlighten us, please?
Indeed, Martin. It's a naming convention in the new CRR III. The alternative standardized approach is the EU implementation of the Basel standardized approach for FRTB. This approach is a sensitivity-based approach metric, so relying on computation of risk sensitivities and stress scenario full revaluation. So it's much more sensitive to the risk, much more comprehensive. It allows a better diversification benefit and hedging benefit recognized in the capital formula. But this comes at the cost of a heavier and much more complex computation effort. So this is a bit the challenge for the bank regarding the standardized approach. On the other side, the alternative internal model approach is replacing the current well-known value at risk, but also for really criticized value at risk via a new model, which is the expected shortfall. This is not only a new model, it's also a new underlying framework for market risk that is required to be developed by the bank, as the development of that expected shortfall model is subject to more severe criteria for risk factor modeling in terms of data quality, which is challenging for transaction you might not have and you need to observe on the market, as well as a better integration of pricing function between actually the front office and all the risk calculation behind. So those are significant effort in terms of systems and operation that needs to be put in place prior to getting an approval for the internal model. It's also important to understand that in order to contribute to the floor, the transversal floor, banks that will put in place an internal model will still have to compute in parallel the standardized approach, doubling the effort.
That's a big burden, I think, because when it's already so complicated and to calculate both, that's really a significant project effort. Absolutely. And one thing that I would like to ask also, because that was confusing me as well, because of the alternative standardized approach, there is still the old standardized approach in place. How does that play out?
You're correct, Martin. Again, there is a principle of proportionality for banks that are not exposed to significant market risk. They might still use the current standardized approach. So this one is much more exposure times weight basis. But for banks that are running and operating a mid-size to large-size trading book, this will not be applicable anymore.
Okay, thank you very much, Guillaume. I mean, there are many technical topics that we could discuss here about FRTB, especially the SBA and the EMA, but we don't have the time for that. But you, as our viewers, you can always watch the other videos of this YouTube channel, because we have already very detailed analysis of these approaches done in the past. So don't miss that kind of videos. But one last technical question I would like to ask you, because I have read also in the CRR3 that there are some significant changes on the calculation of capital requirements for CIUs, collective investment undertakings, in the trading book, like investment funds that are held in the trading book. Could you please give us an overview there? What are the changes and what does it mean for the banks?
Yeah, I can shed some light on this, Martin. With the fundamental review of the trading book, the purpose was to be much more risk sensitive. And therefore, when computing the capital charge for a collective investment undertaking, one needs to understand via look-through what is actually the real underlying exposure in order to allocate the right risk weighting and so on. This being said, it represents a huge challenges for banks, because they don't have access to the asset manager data about the fund composition, or don't have access to that data at the frequency that is required for computing and monitoring the risk. As a result of the consultation and hearing the feedback of the industry, the new banking package is introducing some flexibility, allowing banks to rely on third-party data under specific conditions, as well as using different frequency in terms of updating the portfolio composition, either monthly or weekly, depending on the approach used.
And when these requirements are not fulfilled, then banks have to assign it to the banking book directly?
Yes.
Oh, but that can also mean a significant increase in capital requirements.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's going to be a challenge. So, Guillaume, thank you very much for all these technical details. That is really always a pleasure talking to you. But you are also coming from PwC Belgium, so you are a Belgian expert. You are in the Global Basel IV Initiative, one expert. You are the national Basel IV leader in Belgium, also a leading expert on FRTB. So I would like to ask you a question specific for the Belgian market. What do you think, what will be the impact of the CRR3 in total, but specifically on market risk and CVA risk capital charge for Belgian banks?
Yes, Martin. In my view, both the market risk and the CVA risk are designed in order to better recognize hedging and diversification, and therefore this leads to a better alignment between the economic risk management and the capital charge that is allocated to that. Therefore, I'm expecting Belgian banks as well as other European banks to develop far better hedging strategies in order to reduce the risk, as they can now benefit from capital relief of those strategies, which was not the case in the past.
Okay, thank you very much, Guillaume, for being today here with me and giving us all these insights. And thank you very much to all the viewers for paying the attention to this video. If you have any further questions regarding the EU banking package 2021, regarding the CRR, CRD, or the BRRD, do not hesitate to contact us. You have all contact details of the European Basel IV expert in this YouTube channel in the comment field. So do not hesitate to reach out or directly to the global Basel IV team. We are happy to support you. Thanks again for watching, and thanks again, Guillaume. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.